I think any visit at this point is a good thing because there really hasn't been much senior level contact between Washington and Baku since the beginning of the Trump administration. And I think that absent a U.S. ambassador in Baku, this was probably a good time for the National Security Advisor to make a stop in Baku as well as Yerevan. For obvious reasons relating to Nagorno-Karabakh, but also there's some broader issues that are of interest to both the U.S. and Azerbaijan, particularly as they relate to Iran.
What do you think were the main issues of this visit? What is it that brought Bolton to Baku?
Well, I think, you know, each stop on this trip will be a little bit different. Obviously, the stop in Russia was a different character entirely than the stop in Baku. I think mainly the stop in Baku was to get a sense for Bolton of where Azerbaijan stood on Iran since the U.S. has applied these very, very stiff sanctions. And to look for cooperation from Azerbaijan, certainly not to help Iran avoid those sanctions, which has been the case in the past. Iran has always tried to find some willing partner to keep sanctions from having an impact. So I think that was really the core of the visit. My guess also is that...
Ambassador, before you continue, I want to check you on those sanctions on Iran, because Azerbaijan has been exempt from the part of these sanctions on Iran, the Azerbaijan part of the energy project. What is your perspective on that? Do you think that will continue? Do you think it danger that Azerbaijan's part can also be part of the sanctions? I mean, given the rights record, etc.
Well, certainly, you know, British Petroleum very early on when the sanctions were announced asked for a waiver as it related to the Shah Deniz 2 project and the activities connected to the Southern Gas Corridor. There will be energy-related sanctions that come into effect, as I understand it, in early November. And I think we'll probably have to look and see what is involved there. Azerbaijan's trade relationship with Iran is greater than energy, and the fact that some of the trade between Nakhchivan and the rest of Azerbaijan passes through Iran is going to have to be subject to some sort of a waiver. We simply can't affect what's a normal trading relationship between two parts of Azerbaijan. So that will be one part. I think the second part will be really to see if there are any other energy issues that arise beyond those that were covered by the BP waiver. And I just, unfortunately, I don't know enough about the details of these upcoming sanctions to be able to enlighten you on that point. But I think that would be one thing that Azerbaijan should be very concerned about and make sure that the dialogue between Baku and Washington is open on those topics.
Thank you, Ambassador. And please continue on the other issues on the agenda, please.
I think, Nagorno-Karabakh, obviously, with the stop in Yerevan that I think is taking place today, is really going to be very important. It's very interesting to me that despite all of the tensions in U.S.-Russian relations, our two positions with respect to Nagorno-Karabakh have been remarkably the same. I think sometimes when I listen to what either Foreign Minister Lavrov says or his press spokesperson says, I can close my eyes and say, well, it sounds like something that our Secretary of State and our press spokesperson could say as well. The emphasis on the Minsk group, the need for the parties to begin serious diplomatic negotiations, and the concern that there not be a resumption of military conflict. When it's easy to see only the negative side in U.S.-Russian relations, this at least to this point, looks like an area where we can reinforce the message that we have collectively been sending to the Minsk group through contacts with Bolton and obviously contacts with senior Russian officials, including Foreign Minister Lavrov. The third issue, and I'm not sure...
Ambassador, before we go to the third issue, may I just ask you something else here? You mentioned Lavrov, in a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, repeating to what's been on the table. It somehow echoes what Mr. James Warlick, the former co-chair in OSCE Minsk Group, said a couple of days ago, saying that when I hear Lavrov, I don't think it's anyhow different from what we brought to the table like 2-3 years ago. But in the meantime, there has been Vladimir Putin's initiative to have Azeri and Armenian leaders meet. What's your take on that? Does it change the game, you think?
You know, this has happened before. It's happened with Putin. It happened with Medvedev before that. And, Russia always has an interest in trying to be seen as the key party in the relationship with Armenia and Azerbaijan regarding Nagorno-Karabakh. And so, the bilateral efforts on Putin's part do not surprise me. I don't see them as particularly different as long as the substance remains the same. If Putin through a meeting with the Azerbaijani and Armenian leaders is able to broker an agreement that leads to a diplomatic settlement, I think we should all be happy for that. So I guess I don't see anything new about this. I take some encouragement that he seems to be reinforcing the message that's being delivered otherwise. But at this point, I think it's, like I said, one of those rare cases where the U.S. and Russia are pretty much on the same wavelength.
So how do you regard this latest initiative by Russia? Is it really to bring them together? Is it like peaceful meditation, do you think? Or is it, to support one side or maneuver, Russian kind of maneuver, with the newly elected new prime minister, who's no longer prime minister, by the way?
Yes, that's why I was careful not to rise in status.
Yeah.
Well, I think Russian-Armenian relations are kind of a special character now, especially if you are going to have a change in the leadership, as it appears to be. I think Russia is nervous about new leadership in Armenia that has suggested, at least in its interim state, that it was prepared to be more open regarding relations with the West, at the same time maintaining close relations with Russia. So I think there's that uncertainty on the part of Moscow about where Armenia is going. But I think that uncertainty relates less to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict than Armenian-Russian bilateral relations. I think Russia has significant leverage in both Baku and Yerevan because of its arms sales, and it's used those to increase its influence in both capitals. But I see nothing that would indicate that they're willing to risk conflict reemerging by favoring one side over another. I think the April 2016 resumption of fighting, even though it was just for a short period of time, made everyone recognize that that is not going to be in anyone's interest. Russia's, the U.S., the Minsk group.
Thank you for that. Now back to the agenda, the third issue you said that the Bolton was pursuing in Baku.
Well, I think he's reinforcing the message that our Secretary of Energy has relayed in Europe as well as in Washington, that the Southern Gas Corridor remains an important priority for the United States. I think the energy relationship, which was important certainly for the two previous U.S. administrations, carries over with President Trump. So I think he wanted to, on the one hand, reassure Baku that energy still was an important part of our bilateral relationship. And not knowing the details, my guess would be that he probably would offer U.S. help in a political sense to bring the Southern Gas Corridor to completion. You know, and we're almost there to get that gas pipeline built, and I think given the other priorities that the United States has in the energy area, especially in Europe, that the Southern Gas Corridor is part of that. So that would be the third area that I would think would have been high on the agenda of National Security Advisor Bolton.
And last but not the least, human rights.
Yes.
Do you think Bolton raised this issue, as was asked by international rights organizations such as Human Rights USA?
Well, I've been very
Amnesty USA. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been very strongly promoting, in previous administrations as well, that the United States make human rights more an overt part of our contact with Azerbaijan. I know people believe that quiet diplomacy sometimes is better than public diplomacy on human rights issues, but we continue to have I think, very, very great concerns about what continues to be a pattern of suppression of freedom of expression, of continued detention in jail or in house arrest, or inability to travel of a number of political and press people. It's not become better. And I think, for me, the message should be, while we're talking about these other issues that are clearly important for our bilateral relationship, so too is human rights. And, we just have to look around the world and see the problems that have arisen in the last months to say that, for our relationship to really be the strategic one that I think Azerbaijan would like it to be, there has to be progress on the human rights issue. And I just don't know if that came up at all. If it did, my guess is there wouldn't be anything said publicly about it. But I hope at least that in the private meetings where other issues were discussed, that this issue was raised.
Great. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you.